Now, from CBS News Miami, this is Facing South Florida with Jim DeFede.
Welcome to this special live edition of Facing South Florida. I'm Jim DeFede. We have a lot to cover this morning. Later in the show, I will talk to Kim Rivers, the president of TruLeave, the largest marijuana company in the state, about the amendment to legalize marijuana for anyone 21 years of age or older. We will also take a closer look at the race that I think is critically important but not getting nearly enough attention, and that's the race for supervisor of elections here in Miami-Dade County. And we are going to try and clear up some of the misinformation being spread about Amendment 4, which would restore a woman's right to have an abortion to the same standard it was before Roe was overturned. But we begin this morning with the U.S. Senate race, and while no one is seriously suggesting Kamala Harris will win the state, the Senate race between Rick Scott and Debbie Murkazil-Powell is expected to be a lot closer, which makes Scott's refusal to participate in a single debate so disturbing. This is the first time in the 30 years I've been covering politics in Florida that a candidate for the Senate has refused to debate his opponent. We also requested an interview with Rick Scott so you could hear from him as well, but his campaign never responded. He is welcome to join us next Sunday if he so chooses. In the meantime, we do have Scott's opponent, former Congresswoman Debbie Murkazil-Powell, here this morning. Congresswoman, thank you very much for coming in.
Good morning, Jim.
So I want to start with the notion of no debates.
Yeah.
I've never, I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Has there ever been a period of time where we had either a major statewide office like Senate or governor where we haven't had a debate?
I don't believe so. And look, Jim, this is a man who pled the fifth 75 times to slither away from accountability when he committed Medicare fraud, when he was CEO of the healthcare company. He refuses to stand in the podium next to me because he can't defend his record. His record is indefensible. He knows that everything that he wants to do if he gets back to the Senate, and he wants to become Senate Majority Leader. Just imagine a world where you would miss Mitch McConnell. I mean, this is a man who wants to push for a national abortion ban. He proposed eliminating Medicare and Social Security. He wants to raise taxes on middle-class families. It seems like, once again, he's pleading the fifth right now, right? Avoiding having a discussion and actually abandoning his duty to talk to the people that elected him. Why does he think he deserves another 6 years?
I mean, I looked around the country, California, basically every state, Maryland, we could rattle them all through, Michigan, even in Texas.
Even in Texas.
Ted Cruz debated his opponent in Texas.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that it's dereliction of duty, and I do believe that it is a disservice to Floridians, and it's obvious that he knows that if we stand in a podium next to each other to talk about the issues, the contrast will be so clear.
All right, so let's jump in there. So tell me what that contrast would be. If he were at a podium next to you, what is the contrast that you want voters to know?
Well, the first thing that I want everyone to understand is that this man has been in office in government for 14 years. He has been using the power of that seat for his own self-gain. For me, it's always been about public service, serving the people of Florida, regardless of political affiliations, right? So when I was in Congress, I was very proud to have written a bill to expand Medicare coverage while Rick Scott was writing that 11-point plan for America, which I call it the preamble for Project 2025. They want to dismantle the Department of Education. I believe we need to fund public schools. I believe we need to support our teachers. He has been attacking teachers, saying that they're socialists. I think that it's incredibly important for us to tackle the affordability crisis that we have in our state. I have proposed putting a bill on the Senate that would lower property insurance rates by 25%.
How would it do that? Tell me how that would do that.
It's a federally backed program which would provide insurance companies with the backup of, instead of having enough funding for a once in 150-year storm, it would be once in 50 years. But also, for the crisis that we have with housing. A lot of students that I've been talking to, and I was yesterday at UCF, they can't afford to move out of their home. They can't afford to pay for rent. They are worried they can't find a good paying job. And let's talk about one of the most important issues that we face every single day living in the state of Florida, the climate crisis. We know that we are experiencing stronger and stronger storms. We just experienced in the west coast of Florida Hurricane Helene, Hurricane Milton, and Rick Scott has voted against FEMA funding. You see him walking around with his Navy hat, But he has been spreading disinformation on disaster relief, which puts at risk the people that have lost everything, that they don't know where to begin. And I can tell you, Jim, I have spoken to these families. They didn't have an insurance policy because they couldn't afford it. They're left with nothing, and they don't think that there's relief available to them through FEMA.
You talked about you being on the campus of the University of Central Florida. Yeah. Young people, generally speaking, I feel like I'm in deja vu all over again, because it seems like every election cycle, particularly presidential election cycles, we start with the premise, well, if young people can turn out to vote, this election will go very differently than it might if the young people don't. And yet we never really see young people turning out in the numbers that truly represents them in terms of their power in the electorate. So what is it that you're seeing on campuses, and why do you have any confidence that young people will actually turn out?
So first of all, we have to go to where they're at, right? So I was there on campus. They had a tailgate party. They had a big game at UCF. There were so many students there. And I wanted to remind them that they have the power to really take charge of their life with all the things that they're struggling with and all the issues that they care about, which is the climate crisis, reducing gun violence, something that is very important to me. I lost my father to gun violence. If they remember that they have the power to make those changes, that motivates them. And yesterday I spoke with a lot of students that had not voted yet, but that they were getting ready to vote. They were making a plan. They have voting polling locations at FIU here at the university. I worked at FIU. Come on, Panthers. Let's do this. And also in various locations. And I'm going to be visiting universities all next week, reminding them that the power that they have is to lift up their voices through their vote.
We have seen, though, Republicans, particularly Donald Trump, make a very strong case towards trying to turn particularly young men towards his campaign and theoretically towards Rick Scott's. What is it that you think young men today? I'm an old man.
I'm not an old woman.
You're not an old woman. No.
Don't even go there.
But what my point is that you know, what do you think it is that is taking place among young men, particularly now, that is causing them to run in that direction?
So I'm a mom. I have 3 kids. I have 2 daughters. I have a son. My son is 19 years old. And I've seen how they have retreated a little bit, not my son or his friends, but I think that we are not including them in the conversation, and we need to lift them up just as much as we need to lift up young girls. You know, being a mom, having both, I understand how important it is to include them in the conversation. When we talk about protecting reproductive freedom, I've spoken to my son about that, how this could affect him as well, and he understands it, and we have to have those conversations and bring young men in, and I think that they're capitalizing on that. And there's a lot of disinformation. For a lot of young men, it's about building wealth. Well, I have a lot of plans to build wealth, right? I mean, we need to make sure that we provide access to financing for women and men that want to start their businesses, not only small businesses, but investment firms. I had a conversation with women, a lot of them CEOs of their own companies. We have to lift people up. Let's talk about how everyone can make it here in America. I did so as an immigrant coming here with nothing. We should be able to do that. Let's protect those opportunities, and young men are interested in that. Let's have that conversation.
Well, let's talk about immigration for a second. You just sort of touched on it. This has been a very persuasive issue on the Republican side of things because they believe that Democrats have failed to secure the border, failed to do the things that are necessary.
Well,
how do you respond?
Look, Rick Scott cannot talk about the border. He had 2 opportunities to support a bipartisan bill that came to the Senate floor, and it was a bill written by a very conservative Republican and a Democrat, which provided funding for the border. It was endorsed by Customs and Border Patrol, and he voted against it. But they have been using this issue to weaponize politics, to divide us. So I would have voted for that bill. I support border security. We need to protect our national security. But we also need to provide legal pathways. I've spoken to Republican business owners in the state of Florida. They rely on immigrants in tourism, in the agricultural sector, in real estate. They need those workers, and they want legal pathways. And we're not talking about that. But you know what also is being left behind? The issue of Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, these dictatorships that are choking people's opportunities and the political and social institutions. They need to flee those countries. And what are we doing? No one's really talking about that. You hear them right before election talking about some of the issues there. I want to figure out ways and reach on a bipartisan basis to support countries in Latin America so that we can support freedom and democracy.
You mentioned it briefly before, and we've talked before. I know this story, but viewers may not. You mentioned how about gun violence and how your father's life was taken. It wasn't here in the U.S. It was in where he was from. Right. Talk to me about the significance, the importance of the gun issue for you moving forward. You know,
I don't think a lot of politicians, particularly people like Rick Scott, understand how families are broken when you lose a loved one through gun violence in such a violent manner. And it's a pain and an experience that has linked me and bonded me with too many families here in Florida, parents that lost their children at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. We saw what happened at Pulse. I know the parents of some of those victims as well. And it is the greatest moral failure that we have done nothing to address this issue, that we continue to see our children being killed at schools, at theaters. We need to act. We need to pass a universal background check bill. We know that the majority of Americans and the majority of Floridians support that action. And it's an issue that resonates with everyone. Why are we not talking about that? It's an issue that I talk about with Floridians, and I think that that's also why they're supporting.
These would have been great issues to have a debate about. It would have been wonderful to have if Rick Scott and you could have stood side by side and had an actual debate to educate the voters. Debbie Mercosur-Powell, thank you very much for coming in. When we come back, we are going to turn our attention to the misinformation being spread against Amendment 4. Stay with us. Welcome back. Perhaps the biggest issue on the ballot in Florida is Amendment 4, which would restore a woman's right to have an abortion up until viability, which most doctors agree is around 24 weeks. This amendment would essentially take Florida back to where it was before Roe was overturned. Now, today in Florida, a woman cannot have an abortion after 6 weeks, when many women don't even realize they are pregnant. Governor Ron DeSantis pushed for a 6-week ban as part of his campaign for president. At the time, he was courting evangelical voters in Iowa. His presidential campaign may have died in Iowa, but his fervor to keep the 6-week ban in place maintains that evangelical zeal. Now, here is a picture of Ron DeSantis last week at a Doctors Against Amendment 4 event in Jacksonville. As the doctors laid hands and prayed for the governor backstage, the crowd gathered in the audience listened to more than 20 minutes of Christian music celebrating the glory of Jesus. Now, let's be clear. I'm not criticizing those doctors who are moved by their faith and their religion to oppose Amendment 4. Nor am I surprised to see the governor in the midst of a prayer circle. And I certainly don't question the sincerity of his faith or the faith of any of those doctors. But where it becomes difficult is trying to decipher if their opposition to Amendment 4 is on medical grounds or religious grounds. Now, those lines get even blurrier for the governor, who is using, and some would say abusing, every resource at his disposal to defeat Amendment 4. He is using the Florida Department of Health and your tax dollars to run ads opposing Amendment 4. He has sent his newly created election police force to the homes of people who signed the abortion petition in what some saw as an intimidation tactic. And he announced a criminal investigation into petition organizers, even though the petitions were already certified. The governor has even gone so far as to send television stations across the state letters threatening criminal prosecution against TV stations that run certain ads in support of Amendment 4. Barry Richard is a constitutional law expert who helped draft Amendment 4. Here's what he had to say.
It's unprecedented, and I think it's inappropriate. The governor has the absolute right, as do all public officials, to make public statements as to his position on a constitutional amendment. I do not think it's appropriate for the government to utilize taxpayer dollars to take a position one way or the other on the amendment. And I've been watching this for a long time, and I don't recall an instance before this in which government agencies were so overtly being used to persuade the voters with regard to a constitutional amendment. And I think it's a bad precedent.
Now, the reason I called Barry Richard was to address another issue that the governor often raises, as he did at the rally with those doctors.
It will repeal the right of a parent to have to provide consent before their child undergoes an abortion. And yet, this amendment would permanently take this one issue and say the parents do not have the right to be in that decision-making process or to provide consent.
They are making the same claim in this very powerful commercial you may have seen.
I'm pro-choice, and I vote that way. I'm also a mother, and I vote that way too. And as a mom, I'm against Amendment 4. Amendment 4 overturns Florida's parental consent law, so a teenager can receive an abortion.
It turns out the woman in that commercial is a paid actress. Now, to be fair, she told me she absolutely believes what she said in the ad. But when I asked her why she believed the amendment would overturn parental consent, in other words, was it something she investigated or was it just in the script she was given, she didn't respond. This argument about parental consent is part of the playbook the pro-life movement uses across the country to oppose abortion amendments. In 2022, Michigan had an amendment protecting a woman's right to have an abortion, and this was part of an ad opponents ran in that state.
Proposal 3 permanently rewrites your Constitution with extreme ideas. It takes away parents' rights for abortion.
And in 2023, voters in Ohio were hit with this attack ad opposing their amendment.
Here in Ohio, the ACLU is trying to erase basic parental rights.
You as a parent have rights. I can't support something where I lose my parental rights.
They proposed a constitutional amendment that would abolish parental notification and consent requirements that protect minor girls from undergoing an abortion.
So what happened in those states? Well, both those measures passed and parental consent remains in place in both states. Let me say that again. It is still the law in both Michigan and Ohio that there needs to be parental consent before an underage girl can have an abortion. In fact, there isn't a single state where an abortion measure has passed where parental consent was eliminated. Last week, I spoke to Barry Richard about the issue of parental consent. Opponents of this constitutional amendment argue that this would overturn parental consent. Would this, in your opinion, overturn parental consent?
No, for two reasons. The first is that constitutional amendments are required to state, both in the body and in the summary to the voters, what the amendment will change in the Constitution. They are not required to tell the voters everything it will not do. You'd have a very long laundry list you'd have to put in on every amendment if you had to say everything it doesn't do. That's the first reason. The second reason is that the sponsors, I understand, are currently running public advertisements in which they are saying that it is not the intent of the amendment to eliminate the current legal requirement for parental consent of an abortion on a minor. What the sponsor says at the time of the election is a factor that courts weigh heavily in deciding what the intent of the amendment is, because that's what the voters hear. And so we assume that the voters are believing that at the time that they vote. And that tells us what the voters intended.
What's your reaction to the way the opponents of the amendment are making that claim, outright saying that this amendment will overturn parental consent?
Well, they have no basis for it. In a political campaign, you see people saying anything that they believe will be persuasive. This political year has been worse than most, in my experience. We're just in a period in which I think, unfortunately, the public is going to lose all belief in the credibility of what people say during political campaigns.
Now, Barry Richards said if the state's parental consent law was to be challenged after this passed, the courts would look closely at what people behind the amendment intended. So last week, I spoke to Lauren Brenzel, who is the campaign director of the Yes on 4 campaign. Is it your intention through this amendment to do away with parental consent?
No, it is not our intention to do away with parental consent. This initiative was brought about because we saw a 15-week abortion ban being put into place. We knew that they would then move that to a 6-week abortion ban, and we anticipate that if we don't stop them, they will totally ban abortion in the state of Florida. So the intent of our initiative is to stop those extreme abortion bans.
And so, again, I want to be very clear here. So while it may not have been your intent, do you believe that this will do away with parental consent? Would you like to see parental consent be removed from state statute?
I don't believe that this will undo parental consent. And I think that parents have spoken clearly about the issue of requiring parental notification. If you're requiring notification, I don't see why Florida voters would want to have consent repealed. So I don't believe that our initiative will do that. And I also don't think that that's the will of the Florida voters, nor what they want. And as you've said, we've been very clear in our campaign about this. So no, we're not looking to undo it. No, we are not looking to intervene with people's rights to parent, which includes being able to be involved in medical decisions with them. And I really don't think that the Florida Supreme Court, particularly how it's made up now, will want to undo parental consent.
Well, and let's be even more clear about it. This clip, the words that you're saying right now, could very well be used before the Supreme Court to challenge anyone who wants to try to undo parental consent. The court could look at this interview that you're doing right now and say, it was clearly their intent not to undo parental consent. You're okay with that? You're okay if the state Supreme Court looks at this interview, hears your words, and takes that to be what your position is and the amendment supporters' position are?
Absolutely. I am fine with this being utilized in the future because our mission is to end Florida's extreme abortion ban, which is currently harming women and currently harming their families. We are seeing cases like Deborah Dorbert's, a woman who was forced to give birth to a child that died in her arms within 94 minutes. That is the focus of this initiative, not parental consent, not to undo parental consent.
What has been your reaction to the arguments that are being made against the amendment, but more importantly, even the role that government institutions, that the governor has used, such as the Florida Department of Health, and using taxpayer dollars to actively campaign against the amendment? What's your thoughts about that?
So overall, it's been really disappointing to see our opposition straight up lie about what this initiative will do. But we know that extremists are desperate to keep their abortion bans in place. These are the same lies that we saw in Michigan. They're the same lies we saw in Ohio about what an initiative seeks to do. And our initiative is even more restricted than the ones we saw in other states. It's made specifically for Florida voters to address the near total abortion ban that we have in effect here and to prevent future abortion bans. As far as taxpayer funding is concerned, we've seen $20 million in state resources at this point utilized against our initiative. No matter what side of the issue you are on, you cannot argue that $20 million that was supposed to be used for things like children's Medicaid funding and fighting the opioid crisis, which is actively taking children from families right now, should be utilized to fight a ballot initiative.
Now, one of the criticisms of the amendment is that it's vague, that a lot of the terms aren't defined. This has been an argument that the governor and others have made, and particularly with regard to the issue of the amendment talks about healthcare providers. Yeah. It doesn't identify them only as physicians. Why not use the word physician in the amendment language?
So while the initiative itself doesn't contain definitions, most words in it are defined in Florida statute, or the scope of practice is defined, or the kind of care that a physician is allowed to do versus another kind of provider is defined. So in statute 390, it is clearly stated that only a physician should be able to perform an abortion. We know that that doesn't cause any delays in care because prior to 2 years ago, there wasn't an abortion ban in place and people were able to receive care from physicians without problem. So there is no reason that this initiative would repeal that statute, which states that only doctors can perform abortions.
What's at stake here?
At stake here right now, number one, I think that, again, no matter where you are on this issue personally, we should all agree that we don't want politicians in our doctor's office with us. They aren't qualified to be making medical decisions. And right now, they're also actively putting women's health and safety at risk. We have seen cases like that of Anya Cook, who lost half of the blood in her body in a public restroom floor because she was denied a medically necessary abortion. We have seen women, again, like Deborah Dorbert, who was forced to give birth to a child that died in her arms within 94 minutes. These stories aren't uncommon right now. And we can look at other states that have had their abortion bans in effect for longer to see just how extreme the consequences of these bans can get. In Georgia, Amber Thurman died because of an abortion ban. That is our neighboring state. We are already seeing women dying in neighboring states because of these abortion bans. And the longer we keep this ban on the book, and then allow politicians to ban abortion entirely, the more harm that women in our state will be placed in.
It's also very likely that if it does not pass this time, that it would be very difficult to come back and try to do another amendment. And it's also just as likely, because the legislature has tried this fairly recently, to raise the standard even higher, to raise it from 60% to 2/3.
The legislature is hell-bent on trying to silence citizens' voices right now. It should be our absolute right, especially with abortion in a state's context, for citizens to have a say on what their state policy should be. We already have a 60% threshold in the state of Florida. It is the highest threshold anywhere in our nation for a citizens referred initiative. And we can anticipate that politicians will keep making this process harder if we don't hold them accountable to it. But with the specific issue of abortion, if we don't pass Yes on 4 this November, we can anticipate that they will entirely ban abortion in our state. And that means that they will then come after things like IVF and birth control. We have to send a clear message that politicians should not be involved in women's private reproductive health care, because it extends beyond the issue of abortion.
When we come back, we will be joined here in the studio by the CEO of TrueLeave, Kim Rivers, to discuss Amendment 3, which would legalize marijuana for anyone 21 years or older. And we will check in with CBS News Miami Steve McGeary live at the polls with the latest numbers on how early voting is going so far in Florida. Stay with us.
Now, from CBS News Miami, this is Facing South Florida with Jim DeFede.
Good morning and welcome back to this special live 1-hour edition of Facing South Florida. Now, in a few moments, we will talk to Kim Rivers, the CEO of TrueLeave, about Amendment 3. But before we bring her in, I want to get the sense of how both early and mail-in ballots are going. And joining us now is CBS News Miami's Steve McGeary, who is at an early voting site at the Coral Gables Library, which opened about an hour and a half ago. Steve, I was hoping you could give us a sense of how's it going out there?
Well, Jim, people are starting to come in as the sun is coming up here, and there's a lot of time for people to vote early. It's from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. every day up until November 3rd. And one of the reasons why they do this is to really make sure that there are less long lines at the polls. And we've been breaking down the data on early voting. So let's start with the entire Sunshine State. For mailing in your vote, about 100,000 more Democrats have voted this way compared to Republicans. But it's a different story for early voting. About twice as many Republicans voted early compared to Democrats. And now, hey, let's go to Miami-Dade County. It's a similar tale to the statewide. More Democrats have voted by mail than Republicans, and more Republicans have voted early than Democrats. And then finally, we will head to Broward County. More Democrats have voted early and by mail, so both of them, than their counterparts. But there are close to about 200,000 more registered Democrats in Broward County than Republicans. And now we spoke to a voter here who told us that he actually prefers voting by mail, despite all of these convenient spots to go in person. And he told us why. Take a listen.
Just get it done early so I don't have to think about it again. And you know, sometimes I have time to go and early vote, and I've done that before too.
I guess just over the years you found that mail is your favorite?
Just very convenient.
And another feature is you can find out how long the wait lines are if you go on the website for the county you're voting in. Jim?
Thank you, Steve. I want to get right to our next guest. Kim Rivers is the CEO of TruLeave, which is the largest player in the medical marijuana field here in Florida, and is also the major financial backer of Amendment 3, which would allow anyone 21 years of age or older to possess marijuana. Kim, thank you for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Sorry about FSU, your FSU folks losing last night.
You know what? We scored.
And you got your 7th-string quarterback of the future,
right,
so everything good there.
There you go.
I wanted to go through some of the issues that are being raised against the amendment, and I was trying to find a way to do it, and then I saw a commercial, which in one commercial has everything. So I'm going to play that sound, and then we'll talk more about it on the other side. Let's play that commercial.
Smoking at home is one thing, but not in our bar.
We can't stop people from smoking weed in public if Amendment 3 passes.
Weed in public spaces. Think about it. 70,000 people in a stadium, and what about our theme parks?
And what about our playgrounds? Can you imagine bringing your family here just as I bring my family to a park where there's innocent children and people are smoking marijuana everywhere?
And kids will wind up in the emergency room because weed gummies look like candy, and kids are going to want to eat them.
A few corporations put up $100 million just to get on the ballot.
$100 million.
$100 million. And they're the only ones that can sell it. And you can't even grow it yourself.
All right, that was a lot. Yeah. And in case anyone didn't recognize, that was Casey DeSantis standing in a park, the First Lady of Florida, who's been very invested in opposing Amendment 4. And so I just want to start going through some of the, let's deal with the one right off the bat, the smoking in public places. I saw a Florida state trooper say that he is now powerless, if this passes, to do anything. He can't do anything.
Not true. So absolutely, the legislature would have the ability to ban public smoking, and in fact, a bill has already been drafted to empower them to do that by Senator Joe Gruters. And you know, I use the example that it is our constitutional right to have a firearm. However, you're not going to have a firearm in a stadium. So the notion that this cannot be regulated in public spaces is ridiculous. It will be regulated exactly the same way as nicotine and cigarette smoking is banned now.
All right. Another argument that was being made is the one of a few companies, spending hundreds of millions of dollars to that. Now, let's be fair. You are the largest player, but you're not the only player in this. So address the idea of that this would create a monopoly for you.
Sure. So there are 25 companies today that are licensed to sell cannabis in our communities. There are another 22 companies that are sitting on the governor's desk waiting to be authorized. So that's 47 companies. By the way, that's more companies than we have grocery stores here in the grocery store chains here in the state of Florida. And also the amendment specifically allows in the language for the legislature to license new companies that could be any size, any type. And so this is actually a market expander, not a reduction.
All right, home grow.
Yeah.
You cannot, according to that ad, only the big boys, or big women, can grow marijuana, and you can't grow it at home. And there's truth to that. This amendment wouldn't allow you to have 5 or 6 or 7 plants in your backyard or in your basement.
Sure. So this amendment is silent on home grow. So it does not change current Florida law, which the legislature has the opportunity to change post-amendment passage. So 2 things. One, we have to, of course, in Florida, abide by single subject. In the past, an amendment for legalization has failed because of violation of single subject because it included home grow. We thought it was very important that we need to draw a bright line and stop arresting people in our communities for small amounts of cannabis. Then we can move to home grow. What's so exciting about this campaign is that we have a number of Republicans who seem very excited now about home grow. We've always been supportive of home grow, by the way. We actually have support home grow in many ways in other states, and would love the opportunity to do that here in Florida. So I'm already working on bill sponsors and plan to absolutely lobby for, and hopefully with all of the support now from, again, fellow Republican lawmakers, we can get this passed next session.
The governor said recently in a press conference that no one is in prison. He asked his Department of Corrections to check. No one is in prison for marijuana. You made reference to arrest for marijuana. I think what the governor fails to point out is all the people who have been arrested, the charges are usually dropped, but yet there's an arrest on their record which could have an impact on their lives moving forward.
Yeah, so two things there, right? First of all, there were 16,000 people last year who were arrested for, and actually some of those were jailed. So we've got jail and prison. Prison is a federal offense, so he's right. There is no one in prison for marijuana. I think that's disingenuous, right? Because we know that thousands and thousands of Floridians are arrested, and some of those actually are in our county jails for periods of times, and their lives are ruined, right? I talk to folks all the time. I just talked to an individual here actually in Miami who wanted to become a teacher and actually was denied the ability to become a teacher because he had a marijuana charge on his record from when he was in his late 20s.
I think one of the issues that was raised in that commercial that we played before, which would disturb a lot of people, is the notion that children will be impacted by this, that the packaging that you're going to design, the packaging that the state will allow on marijuana will make it seem as if they're like candy, and you'll have children swallowing up gummies, marijuana-laced gummies, and as a result they'll die and have all sorts of issues.
Sure.
Address that.
So first of all, I'm a mom. The only way to protect our youth is through legalization. The notion that we are going to have brightly colored gummy bears is absolutely false. I actually brought a little show and tell. This is what marijuana packaging, and these are our gel package that is sold in Florida today. It's dosed, it's labeled, there's a QR code right there that actually shows you the lab result. You know exactly what's in it, an ingredient list in a child-resistant container. When you open it, which is a little difficult, when you open it, inside there's another bag, white, opaque. This is what it says. It says THC in it. When you open this bag, which I'm going to do right now, let me show you what this looks like. This is an actual product that is sold in a store right now. This is what it looks like. It doesn't look like a bright colored gummy bear, gummy worm, or anything. It actually looks like a Hall's menthol cough drop. This is what we're talking about. So again, the notion that we are going to be selling something that resembles candy is absolutely false, and everything on this package is regulated by the Department of Health and has to be approved by the Department of Health, including the fact that there's no colors, there's no design, and all of our advertising has to be approved as well.
That was for as it relates to medical marijuana. Would those same rules apply if the amendment passes and you were dealing with recreational marijuana?
Absolutely. So actually the recreational amendment builds on top of the medical amendment that's currently in the Constitution and incorporates that current framework into the recreational program. So we would absolutely expect, and candidly, I expect there to be further restrictions on the adult use program. And so a bill was making its way through the House and Senate last year in anticipation, and basically said that there would be product differentiation. So the legislature has the full ability to say certain products for the medical side, certain products for the adult use side.
You know, if the governor had been so concerned about the idea, or the first lady was so concerned about you know, packaging that may be ingested by children, or that it may have some sort of fentanyl laced in it, then he shouldn't have vetoed the hemp bill that went through the legislature last year, which was, that was their main concern, was that there was nobody actually monitoring what you were selling in some of these smoke shops.
Yeah, so I mean, again, there is a clear distinction between, again, what we are selling in a regulated, controlled marketplace versus the unregulated and illicit market. I can promise you that when you go, and if you get, you know, a product from an edible product or a smokable product from a dealer or from a gas station or from another unregulated shop, you're definitely not going to get a lab test. You're not going to have an ingredient list. You're not going to have a dosage, right? And so when we talk about hospitalizations, we are talking about the unregulated illicit market. We are not talking about the regulated market. And again, the only way to protect our youth, and candidly, the way to give safe access to the 2 million Floridians who are currently accessing marijuana in our state through the illicit and unregulated market, is through Amendment 3.
The financial side of this.
Sure.
Let's first sort of, TruLeaf stands to make a lot of money if this passes, so that's one thing, but the state does as well.
Sure.
So I think that the State Revenue Conference has estimated maybe $200 million in additional tax dollars the first year, eventually climbing to about $430 million a year.
Yep.
Where is that money going to go? Now, I realize that you don't control it, that's the legislature, but what are you hearing talk in terms of how that money will be used?
Yeah, and so in conversations, we believe that those dollars will likely go to police and also to education. And we've seen that trend in a lot of other states that have generated billions of dollars for both police and again, for more resources for our police to make sure that they have proper education and that they're equipped, right? Not only to deal with, again, marijuana, but other substances, but then also education. We want to make sure that, our youth are educated and that we can run education programs.
I realize this is for anyone 21 years or age or older, but there are parents who are going to watch this, grandparents who are going to watch this, so I know my demographic, who are going to be afraid of this amendment because they think it's going to filter down to their children, that it's going to make drug use more permissible, more acceptable. What would you say to them?
So again, two things. Statistics show that in states that have legalized, youth access actually declines. So that's number one. Why? We age gate. We make sure that it's only 21 and up, right? And again, we have lots of measures to make sure that this is not attractive to children. But I will say the second thing. The second thing is that in the event that there is an accidental usage, right? The fact that you have a package with an ingredient list, you know exactly what's in it, you can take it with you in the event that there's an adverse reaction, is very different than, again, something that's in a baggie that is found off of the street, right? And so the adverse risks here that we're seeing, again, is in the unregulated market. So I'll just say it one more time. The only way to actually protect our kids is to pass Amendment 3 and to get the products off of the streets and into a store. In Colorado, over 90% of transactions now happen in a store in a regulated way. And that actually leads to, again, a decline in youth access.
Kim Rivers, I want to thank you very much for your time.
Thanks so much.
All right. Up next, for the first time in more than half a century, Miami-Dade voters will be electing a supervisor of elections. It is a critical race, and we will take a closer look. Stay with us.
Thanks so much.
Yep. Welcome back. I've been saying for months that the most important race this November, which largely has been flying under the radar, is the race to see who will become the supervisor of elections in Miami-Dade County. The Republican candidate for the post is Alina Garcia. Garcia has been endorsed and promoted for the position by former President Donald Trump. And I think we know why Trump likes her, because Garcia refuses to say who won the 2020 election. Let that sink in for a moment. The woman who wants to oversee elections in Miami-Dade County refuses to acknowledge that Donald Trump lost and Joe Biden won. I have tried for months to set up an interview with Alina Garcia, but she has never responded to my calls, to my emails, or to my texts. Last week, she had her attorney contact me, and this was his response to the simple question, does she believe Joe Biden won in 2020? Quote, she has no personal knowledge about what happened in other states as the rules were made less stringent due to COVID concerns, etc. She has never said anything that states that Joe Biden did not win the election in 2020. All right, well, I hope that clears it up. She's not saying he didn't win. She's just saying he didn't win. Or did she win? He's not really saying. She is not going to comment about election issues in other states that she has no personal knowledge about. All right. Garcia, in other words, as I was trying to say, Garcia won't say Biden won. She's not necessarily saying he didn't win. And she's doing it at the same time while casting doubts about other states. So let's bring in her opponent, J.C. Planas, a longtime election attorney and former Republican state legislator who is now a Democrat. J.C., let me try to just ask you, who won the 2020 election?
It's very clear that Biden won, but I think what is most concerning about her answer is basically the fact that there's only really 5 voter systems, and they all work on the same type of technology. All of the results are public, and there have been hand recounts in several states. There have been audits. So to say that someone has no personal knowledge of how the other states went, that's fine if you're an ordinary citizen. But if you are running to be supervisor of elections and you don't know that there are only 5 systems, and you don't know that those systems were audited, and you don't know that basically every check that has been done on those systems shows that the results were accurate, you probably shouldn't be supervisor of elections, because you don't even have a basic curiosity of how the process works. And that's what's dangerous, is not necessarily that she refuses to say if Biden won. What's dangerous is that someone who wants to lead a technology-driven position can't say how these states were totally accurate because they're all basically the same technology.
All right, I want to give you a chance to respond to one of the criticisms of you, which she has raised in some of her advertisements, and I will tell you, her attorney was quick to send me this information. She doesn't want to appear, but they didn't mind sending me the fact that you recently received a fine from the state ethics or from the local ethics commission for filing a frivolous complaint.
It wasn't a fine.
Okay, tell me what it was.
So what happened was there was a candidate for Miami Beach mayor, and there were 5 other candidates for Miami Beach mayor, and all the other 4 candidates all filed their proper gift disclosures for the second quarter, which was the last complete one. Well, this certain candidate, and I'm not even going to go into the name, he files an incomplete third quarter, different from all the other candidates, because the Miami Herald had run a story that during the time of the second quarter, he had received an invitation to a swanky multi-$1,000 a ticket party.
All right, I'm gonna jump in here.
I filed the complaint. They deemed it was frivolous. I appealed.
And as a result, he was able to claim that he needed his attorney fees, and
yes.
and so they say you owe them.
They are completely wrong.
Okay.
I have appealed it. In fact, most of the case law says that he was not entitled to attorney's fees.
All right,
but it was nothing ethical against me.
All right, why do you want this job?
Frankly, you want the real answer?
Yeah.
I'm a giant elections nerd. This is what I love. I'm running for my dream job. I have a spreadsheet that goes back to 2006 on everyday early voting numbers. I've tracked numbers. I've tracked how voting patterns work. This is the job I was born to do, and I'm not trying to brag on myself, but the truth is that in my 9 years of teaching election law, in my 15 years of being an elections attorney, I have delved deeper into the way people vote than most any other person. And this is something that I love doing.
What can we do to get more people voting? What do you think, in your role as election supervisor, you can do so that we see bigger turnout?
I can tell you right now, Tallahassee has a big fault in what's going on, because I assure you that right now, as we speak, there are voters sitting at home scratching their heads going, wait a minute, I haven't received my vote-by-mail ballot. And Tallahassee canceled everybody's vote-by-mail ballot request, and there were people that just had an automatic vote-by-mail ballot, and they really have not realized that this got canceled. We will try harder to reach out. In fact, everybody's vote-by-mail ballot now gets automatically canceled on January 1st. So when I take office January 6th, the first thing we start doing is re-enrolling people in vote-by-mail ballot for the 2026 election, because it's going to take 2 years to do this. We're going to go out into the community in a way that the current supervisor cannot, because she's constrained by the county's communication arm. We're going to be independent, and we're going to be able to go out and reach the voters in a way that the current system cannot.
It's how seriously do you take the idea of the sanctity of a person's vote? Whether they vote Republican, Democrat, or for some third party, is the goal here just to get more people to vote? Absolutely. Or are you just trying to get more Democrats to vote?
We're trying to get everybody. And I've been very frank, because I go into senior centers that are 90% Republican, and I tell them, and I've helped some of them register for their vote by mail, and I tell them I'm going to come back. This is not about protecting the votes of the people that are going to vote for me. I have to protect the votes of those that aren't going to vote for me even harder, because that's how we protect our democracy. So we're going to be going out into heavily Republican areas to get them to get their vote by mail ballot as well.
J.C. Planas, I want to thank you very much for coming in. Sorry we couldn't spend more time. There's a lot on the ballot, but I wanted to make sure this issue got back in front of voters today. All right, we'll be right back.
Thank you.
If you have any thoughts or comments about today's show, feel free to contact me at jdefede@cbsmiami.com. Oh, I do love hearing from you. Well, that's all the time we have. We'll be back again next Sunday morning at 8 with another special 1-hour live edition of Facing South Florida. Remember, early voting continues in Miami-Dade and Broward through next Sunday. Thanks again for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day.